This week, the walls are closing in on the Russiagate scandal. New details following a grisly murder in Arkansas. We have the latest. And President Trump says Nancy Pelosi should be investigated. The panel discusses why. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall, and now let's meet our panel, the guys behind the stories you read at readlion.com. Josh Mann, our managing editor, Michael Ryan, executive editor, and Adam Wittenberg is one of our staff writers here at The Lion. Gentlemen, welcome in. Lots to cover, as always, another busy week. You guys have been busy on it. Josh, let's start with you. Russiagate. We're going to cover this a little later. It's been hotly debated as to who might be in the crosshairs of potential prosecution, but what do you know about it thus far?
Well, just this morning, Senator Grassley released some new information, new documents, the Durham Annex it's called, and there's some incredible allegations here. Here's the short of it. There is evidence that on Obama's way out in 2016, that they actually cooked the books. And so we've talked about this a little bit. It's been widely reported now. Allegations that the Obama administration asked basically for assessments, intelligence assessments, to be cooked up that allege that Trump and Russia were colluding to win the election, that Russia was involved. This latest release of documents this morning, as we record, ties a Soros-funded official at Open Society Foundation to the whole thing. And let me just read to you an email that this Soros person allegedly wrote. This is before there was any official FBI assessment of or investigation into possible Russia collusion. This person says, during the first stage of the campaign, due to lack of direct evidence, it was decided to disseminate the necessary information through the FBI-affiliated technical structures, ... and then be disseminated through leading U.S. publications. This guy's last name is Bernardo. And so what this Soros official is saying, basically, is we've got a plan to tie Russia to Trump, and we're going to disseminate it through FBI structures and the American media. This is before December of 2016. I mean, it's unbelievable. If this is true and pans out, this is an incredible conspiracy, really.
And, Michael, the question that I've been pondering over and over again, I think it's safe to assume that people that didn't vote for Donald Trump probably aren't any warmer to him today. Are there people in the electorate who are willing to hear this and be convinced that something really nefarious happened, or is everybody pretty entrenched? In other words, are there Americans that can and should learn more about this and would be interested to at this point?
Well, I really think so. You're going to have a hard left that will never grant anything in Trump's favor. But polls are showing some movement on this issue, that more and more people in the middle and left are understanding that the Steele dossier at the heart of the Russia collusion hoax was not real, that it was fake. You know, these document dumps are basically proving that Hillary Clinton created this Russia collusion hoax that Josh was just talking about to sabotage the Trump campaign, and then it was later used to sabotage his very presidency, and that the FBI actually eagerly legitimized it, knowing that it was fake, knowing where it came from. And these burn bag documents and these other document dumps reportedly confirm it. The Biden FBI apparently didn't want these documents found. They wanted them destroyed. And earlier documents have shown that Obama himself built upon Hillary Clinton's dirty trick to create the larger Russia collusion narrative. Now think about this. This is the most powerful elements of our federal government cooking intelligence to stack the deck against a rival presidential candidate and eventual president. This is the biggest scandal in U.S. history.
Adam, I assume you share that point of view. Are there swayable Americans who are willing to listen to this, in your view?
Yeah. Well, Chris, I mean, you're asking in some ways the key question. I mean, I agree. This is bigger than Watergate. This is the biggest, if not the biggest scandal, in modern U.S. history. But you're asking the right question is, can people hear it? And unfortunately, we're living in an age where things have gotten so partisan that the left has their media sources and that's it. And sometimes the right, they're in their media silo and that's it. And we almost can't hear the other side. And I do think that's some of the work we're trying to do here at the Lion is be fact-based and try to we promote certain things and believe certain things, but we aren't going to sacrifice the truth. And my hope and my prayer is that more people or some people will awaken and see, or at least begin to question, is this really real?
Yeah, it's a great point, Adam. And I would say to you, Josh, I just saw a Pew study before we came in today that said we have never been more diametrically opposed and sort of encamped in wherever we are politically, and that shared common set of facts doesn't exist anymore. Will we ever get back there? And was that ever really true? I mean, is there just no such thing as Americans all rally around a common set of facts?
No, I think it was more the case. I think there used to be more consensus, and at least we agree to disagree. So I am concerned by that. But I'll just use myself as an example on this Russiagate stuff. I was skeptical, and I really was listening to what the left was saying. I was trying to account for their arguments and the ways that they were distancing themselves from it, and accusing the Trump administration of maybe exaggerating. But the more that comes out, the more I'm convinced, and so I'm shifting and beginning to really think, no, this is real evidence. I mean, here is what else this Bernardo wrote. He says that a Clinton campaign advisor who he names says it will be a long-term affair to demonize Putin and Trump. Now it is good for a post-convention bounce. This was after the DNC in 2016. Later, the FBI will put more oil on the fire. If that is really written before December of 2016, I mean, you've got evidence right there that's very hard to ignore.
Chris, you ask if there can be a shared experience in understanding and absorbing this information on the Russia collusion hoax. I'm afraid that the last shared experience that Americans had was the series finale of MASH.
And well, Michael, while I've got you on this, I would ask about people who are supportive of President Trump. A lot of them, as I understand it, are getting very frustrated. They don't feel that justice is being delivered swiftly enough. So that's the next question. What does justice look like here, in your view? And are people who are supportive of Donald Trump and deeply concerned about this getting the justice they want fast enough? Well,
the conservatives on my X feed, as I said in a prior episode here, there are two basic themes. One is that arrests should happen, and two is arrests won't happen. So conservatives are extremely cynical about whether the Republicans are going to actually do anything about this. I would give them the benefit of the doubt. When you got Kash Patel and Dan Bongino on the case, I think there are some serious chances of some serious charges here. Now, Obama may be immune. I think that's an open question. But certainly Brennan, Clapper, Comey et al. Are fair game for charges.
And a little later we'll discuss in the show just exactly who might be the first target in this investigation. Adam, we shift to you. Another bit of breaking news in the last 24 hours, again, as we tape this show today. What seemed to be a random, out-of-nowhere murder in Arkansas in a state park. Now the suspect has been captured.
Yeah, this is super disturbing. A 28-year-old school teacher. He taught fourth grade. He actually taught in three different, taught in two and was scheduled to teach in a third state. And this could be an example of passing the trash, okay? Because this guy, he was... in his first teaching role, reported, weird behavior toward these fourth grade girls, like sitting on his lap and special attention. And he was investigated. No specific wrongdoing was found, but he was found to be below expectations and released from his job. He just moved. I think that was in Texas. He just moved to Oklahoma and taught there, or maybe it was vice versa, and then moved to Arkansas and got hired. He passed the background checks. So the murder is disturbing, but this does call into question about what kind of people are entering the public school workforce. Yes, there were some safeguards in place and some investigations, but this really doesn't look good.
Does it just look like a cold-blooded killing, Adam? Is that basically what we're seeing? No relation that we know at the moment?
Yeah, they're saying there's no discernible motive at this point.
Yeah, wow. We'll continue to cover that at readlion.com. Michael, we turn to you. We were just talking a little bit about the politics of the day. Whatever you might think about President Trump, Democrats are not faring any better.
No. As a matter of fact, a new Wall Street Journal poll shows they have a 33% favorability rating and only a 8% very favorable rating. The Democrats, and you can see why, because they're doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down even on wildly unpopular positions, talking about men and women's sports, you're talking about deportations of very violent and dangerous criminal illegals, just about against everything that Trump is for. Meanwhile, he has the economy rocking and the world is his oyster. So a lot of people are wondering, what do the Democrats stand for other than abject hatred of the president?
And coming up, we've got some more evidence of that. Josh, some say, depending on which polls you read and what you think, that President Trump's approval is slipping a tick on various issues. But again, do Democrats benefit from that?
You would think they might, but actually what this poll found was that despite some disapproval of certain Trump his record on certain things, such as inflation, let's say. There's a little bit of disapproval out there, but they still rate Republicans well over Democrats. And so despite some disapproval of the president, people are still in the polls approving of Republicans generally, which is a huge problem for Democrats. One pollster involved in this poll said the Democratic brand is so bad they don't have the credibility to be a critic of Trump or the Republican Party. This is a Democrat pollster talking.
Young people, I also read, are starting to trend, according to Pew. Some new data that I saw, both young men and women, men particularly, but women too, are starting to trend a little more, or in some cases much more, toward the Republicans and Trump specifically. And I don't wonder if our next story has a little bit to do with that. You know, we talk about the housing market, how expensive it is for young people to get into it. A couple of weeks ago, the Trump administration said, we're going to let rent history help you in getting qualified for a mortgage. But now there's something new, Adam.
Yes, Trump and the housing administrator, Bill Pulte, have announced plans to allow cryptocurrency to be counted as an asset when being considered for a mortgage. And legislation has now been introduced in the Senate that would codify that. And where it stands currently is if you have cryptocurrency, you have to cash it out, convert it into cold hard cash or into U.S. dollar in order to have it considered as a mortgage asset. But that would change under this proposal. And, the statistics show that home ownership for those under 35 is at the lowest point in modern history. It's like about 1/3 of people under 35 own a home, but 2/3 of them own crypto assets and digital currencies. And so this is another play right by Trump to a demographic, like you said, Chris, that is actually shifting towards supporting him, and he's trying to deliver real results.
Speaking of home ownership, we're going to get into that in a little bit, too, as we discuss the interest rates and the Fed, which has remained unchanged again this week. Adam, I'll stay with you on another story you worked on at readlion.com, and that's on religious freedom. Trump is also pushing hard for federal workers to enjoy that.
Yeah, this was a really clear and enjoyable story. Basically, the Trump administration issued a memo, a directive, saying you can't discriminate against people of faith in the workplace, in the federal workplace. So if you're a Christian or Muslim, Jewish, or whatever you are, you can bring a religious relic to work. You can display a Bible or a religious symbol on your desk. You can even talk about your faith with a coworker or invite them to a prayer service or a religious meeting. Now, you can't harass them. If they say no, you can back off. But you don't have to check your faith at the door. And really, this is what the Founding Fathers intended. It wasn't freedom from religion. It was freedom to practice your religion as part of your life and free speech. And that's what the memo says.
Michael, any final thoughts?
Yeah, it's just people can be themselves, even if they work for the federal government. And about the most important thing in the world to them, their faith. Can federal employees proselytize? No. Do they have to hide their faith or their humanity? Not any longer. And to expect them to have done so was clearly religious discrimination.
Great stuff, panel. Thank you. When we get back, some sights and sounds from cable news and the news networks when the Lion Week in Review returns. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. If you missed today's show or you miss any shows, you can always check them out on YouTube. And as for the day's stories and every day's breaking news, head to readlion.com as we dive into some of the news of the last week since we all met here in studio. And one of them was the tail end of last week, really kind of an unusual scene as President Trump heads to the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C., tours with Jerome Powell in hard hats, discussing the overruns, the cost overruns in the renovation of the building.
Billion went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no,
including the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
3 points, not a little bit, but 3 points. If you got us down to 1, we would save more than $1 trillion, basically with just a paper transfer. You wouldn't be cutting costs of anything. You wouldn't be building anything. Just a move of the hand saying we're going to lower interest rates. You would save $1 trillion a year.
So that was just after he and Jerome Powell took the tour, President Trump encouraging to lower interest rates. Well, as of today, we know Jerome Powell did not agree to lower interest rates. But, Michael, what was all of that, and did it have the intended effect that Donald Trump was trying to land there in calling out Jerome Powell to his face in front of the cameras?
Well, I think the major point here is that it's making things difficult on the economy and on young people. You know, young people, it strikes me, are protesting a lot of things that seems to make no sense. They're protesting Israel's right to defend itself. They're protesting deportations of dangerous criminal illegals. They're protesting the cancellation of the CBS Late Show, for Pete's sake. What they may think about doing is protesting the Fed, which is arguably making housing unattainable for them.
And, Adam, the fact that the Fed chair sort of dismissed cost overruns, that should land on people's ears in a bad way, I would think, if they're struggling to get into their first home.
Oh, absolutely. What I love here is that Trump, as he's done with other world leaders or important people, he's prepared. He has the evidence on him. It's in his suit pocket. And so they can't just deny. I think he's much more savvy in this second term. Fun to watch. And you're absolutely right that we need to be more critical of the Fed in general, and certainly as it relates to housing, interest, the economy. There's a lot at stake here.
Josh, we'll go back to where we started today's show. Who's responsible, or who may be first in line, perhaps for prosecution in Russiagate? A couple of folks, Jonathan Turley being one, Bill O'Reilly another. They have their theory as to who's first on deck.
The Tulsi Gabbard drop of classified information that's now declassified. The headline in there is that John Brennan, former director of the CIA, is in trouble. And I believe he will be indicted. And the telling part of this is that, and this is, I'm quoting from the report from the Select Committee on Intelligence, the House Select Committee, is that Brennan knowingly, published 3 reports containing information that was, quote, unclear, of uncertain origin, potentially biased or implausible. If that's true, and we need to give Mr. Brennan due process, he's going to be charged.
Well, you also need to prove
they'll present that evidence in front. They'll present the evidence in front of a grand jury.
And it does appear that a couple of these figures may have committed perjury. I think the most vulnerable may be Brennan, who's like a 30-point buck now out in the open. I mean, this stuff goes directly to information that he gave to Congress. It seems to be in contradiction.
Jonathan Turley not prone to hyperbole, Josh Mann. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Brennan, we did actually a pretty deep dive on Brennan and his background, some incompetence in the CIA through the years, some failures on his part. My personal take is that he's kind of a pragmatic opportunist who got, he was fairly high up in the Clinton administration and then, of course, in the Obama administration. Others might think there's a little bit more going on here, but he's certainly in trouble. I think a lot of this evidence looks pretty bad for him. I think O'Reilly might be right. He might be the first to be indicted. Michael,
Brennan, problematic figure in this story, and many people believe he has a pretty questionable history to boot.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but basically Brennan was a good soldier doing Obama's bidding in a very bad cause. Perjury, probably. Sedition, possibly. And if using government tools, the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, to sabotage a presidential campaign and then a president isn't a crime, it sure needs to be.
While this is going on, Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, took to the Senate floor and had this to say.
I see law firms bending a knee to this president, not caring about the larger principles, that those free speech rights, that you could take on any client, why are you bending the knee? I see universities that should be bastions of free speech bending at the knee to this president. I see businesses taking late-night talk show hosts off the air because they dare to insult a president. I see people who want mergers suddenly think that they have to pay tribute to this president. And what are the very people here elected to defend the Constitution of the United States saying, oh, well, today, let's look the other way and pass some resources that won't go to Connecticut, that won't go to Illinois, that won't go to New York, that will go to the states he likes.
So, Adam, this drives home the point we were making earlier. While we're talking about Brennan and this Russiagate scandal, that's what the Democrats are offering on the Senate floor. That's how they see things.
Yeah, it's blatantly partisan, and what's happening is Trump is being successful in his reforms. He's changing power structures. He's getting results on things like campus anti-Semitism and the transgender issue, which Americans overwhelmingly agree with him on, immigration, all these things. It's threatening people like Booker, like Chris Murphy from Connecticut, all these liberal senators that have had their way for so long. And because Trump's so effective, they don't have an answer. All they can do is cry, and they claim it's the end of democracy. Well, we're a democratic republic to start with. It's really the end of their reign of power.
And Democrats have leaned in heavily on the Epstein story, something we talked about last week. Michael, I'll get your comments on the other side of this as we hear from Speaker Johnson on the issue, as well as Bernie Sanders, who was specifically asked about Ghislaine Maxwell and if she testified before Congress. Take a listen.
And I want to say this about my colleagues Ro Khanna and Jim McGovern and Hakeem Jeffries and so many others. They've tweeted about Epstein countless times in the last 2 weeks, but go back and look at their social media accounts we have and their public comments. They had exactly 0 posts on the subject for the last 4 years of the Biden administration. Interesting, isn't it?
Would you be okay with Congress giving her immunity to testify? That's what she wants.
I haven't thought about it. I don't know the answer to that.
No position.
You're the first person who has asked me about it.
Okay, well, when you have a position, will you let us know?
You'll be the first.
So, Michael, the point in all this is, as Cory Booker demonstrated, it seems like Democrats are trying to find a lane. They're leaning into the Epstein thing, but how serious are they about it, really?
Not very. By the way, I love seeing Cory Booker out there taking that 8% favorability out for a spin. You got to admire that. Democrats didn't want this out there for 4 years under Biden, and now obviously they want it out there if they see a political advantage against Trump and the Republicans. What we need to be talking about, really, if you're serious about it, isn't Republicans or Democrats. It's about victims and perpetrators.
Josh, what about this story? It's clearly not gone away. Where does it go? Where is it going?
Yeah, I don't know. Clearly, the Democrats are trying to capitalize politically on it. Trump seems very tired of it. I think it's probably true that if he were implicated in these files, they would have been released, especially given the Russiagate stuff that we're learning about now. So there's probably not a lot to see there. I think the bigger questions, and I think the more problematic questions, are why were we kind of promised information and then we were told there was no information? I think there are a lot of people, especially on the right, who are worried about that. Obviously, the Democrats don't care, except that maybe they can taint the administration somehow, some way.
And does the Russiagate story, Adam, in coming out at this exact same time as the debate over Epstein and what we know or don't know, purposeful, intentional, coincidence, and what does it do for each story, do you think?
You know, Chris, that's an excellent question. Obviously, in that bigger political scope, it does bode well for Republicans who, if they wanted to, take heat off of the Epstein issue, which Trump was definitely trying to do over the last few weeks. Like, why are you still talking about that? Well, boom, we do have something new and, certainly super significant to talk about. So I do still hope that the truth about the Epstein files and case will be released at some point. But you're absolutely right. And we have to watch for that in politics, that, they drum up the new scandal or release the information at the key time to take the tension off of something else. We absolutely need to be on guard about that.
And Michael, the thing they have in common, whether it's the Epstein story or the Russiagate story, the thing they have in common is it seems to be big, powerful government folks concealing information that the public really ought to know and needs to hear.
Yeah, and you have to just assume, I think at this point, that the Democrats' attention on the Epstein files is the shiny object principle, trying to deflect away from the Russiagate accusations.
And then there is Nancy Pelosi, who came up this week. Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, has introduced the Pelosi Act and caught a little bit of the president's ire, but it was sort of an interesting thing as the president commented on Pelosi's wealth. She was then asked about it a little later on CNN, but Jake Tapper didn't care about it, care for it at all. Take a listen to this.
Nancy Pelosi became rich by having inside information. She made a fortune with her husband, and I think that's disgraceful. So in that sense, I'd like it, but I'd have to really see I study these things very carefully, and this just happened. So I'll take a look at it. But conceptually, I like it. And what I do think is Nancy Pelosi should be investigated, because she has the highest return of anybody practically in the history of Wall Street, save a few. How did that happen? It happened by she knows exactly what's going to happen, what's going to be announced. She buys stock, and then the stock goes up.
Let me just read what he said. I'm sorry that we had some sort of technical issue. Nancy Pelosi became rich.
Why do you have to read that? We're here to talk about the 60th anniversary of Medicaid. That's what I agreed to come to talk about.
But I
and
wanted
what that means in the election.
I wanted to give you a chance just to respond. He accused you of insider trading. What's your response to that?
That's ridiculous. In fact, I very much support the trading of members of Congress. Not that I think anybody's doing anything wrong. If they are prosecuted and they go to jail. But because of the confidence it instills in the American people, don't worry about this. But I have no concern about the obvious investments that had been made over time. I'm not into it. My husband is, but it isn't anything to do with anything insider.
Michael, I think she just endorsed the Pelosi Act, which is sort of interesting. But this week, Josh Hawley, he voted with Democrats to get this thing passed out. Trump didn't like specifically the Pelosi Act that Josh Hawley endorsed. So it's a little confusing because he, in the clip, said, yes, he thinks Nancy Pelosi's up to no good, but there was something in this act that Josh Hawley supported that Trump did not like, and he kind of took Hawley to task over. Do you understand it?
I think so. But first of all, I want to talk about Nancy Pelosi. She's taken a cue from Jasmine Crockett in withdrawing support for this interview, this profile. And in terms of Pelosi's stock market prowess, I mean, if she was a poker player in the Old West, there would have been guns around the table drawn long ago because of the shady goings-on. Hawley was on Jesse Waters last night. Said he talked to the president. They smoothed it over. Basically, to get it out of committee, I think the senator had to agree to a Democrat proposal that the stock ban would apply to the president and vice president. Hawley's version would not apply to this president and vice president, be grandfathered in. But I wonder about the constitutionality of even doing that with the executive branch.
But is there anyone on the panel today, Adam, I'll ask you, and Josh, I'll ask you too, anybody disagree with the premise that stock trading ought not happen if you're a sitting member of Congress? Adam?
No, I think it's pretty clear and commonsensical. I mean, you can look up Nancy's profile and others. They've even made apps where you can invest like a senator or like a congressperson because they have such a crazy good rate of return, almost impossible, like Michael was saying. So it is high time that this gets shut down, severely restricted in a way that even Nancy said instills confidence in the American people. Now, she says this after decades of doing the very thing that this law would now ban, and she's near the end of her life. But here we go.
Josh, final thought?
Yeah, I've got a little bit more of a libertarian take on it, I think. I'm always a little concerned when we're clamping down on the rights of Americans to do things, including elected representatives. However, clearly there's been a lot of things that appear to be insider trading. So I guess my question would be, what is going on and why isn't that being caught? Maybe there's some other things that we can do with insider trading to kind of catch some of this stuff, but clearly it doesn't look good for Pelosi.
Panel, thank you. When we return, our special for the whole year, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the country and our Faith and Freedom 250 segment next on the Lion Week in Review.
When the United States Constitution was written, it marked the beginning of a new era in human liberty. But it was not enough on its own. To fully secure the freedoms of every citizen, the Bill of Rights was needed. And at the forefront of those rights was religious liberty.
When our Constitution was drafted, it balanced a complicated set of issues between different regions of America and different sizes of colonies to create a fair framework. The delegates to the convention argued, struggled, and compromised to meet the needs of their constituents and form a new nation. But even after all that work, it was still not enough to assure ratification. It would take a separate document ratified in 1791 to guarantee the rights of individuals and successfully launch our ship of the state. The Bill of Rights introduced the first 10 amendments to protect every citizen, and leading that list of protections was freedom of religion. The reason religion was so important to our founding fathers is because it starts over 250 years before the Constitution was even conceived.
Before diving into that history, it's important to look at the actual text of the First Amendment and understand exactly what the Constitution says about religion. The full text reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." Religious matters here are addressed in two distinct clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. The Establishment Clause has deep historic roots. In Great Britain, for ages, even the kings and queens did not enjoy unlimited power and authority. The power they had over earthly matters was immense, but matters of the soul belonged to the church and ultimately to the Pope in Rome. That changed dramatically when King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. When the Pope refused to grant the annulment, the king was furious. He broke from Rome, created the Church of England, and made himself its head. For the first time in English history, the monarch was both head of state and head of the church, combining religious and governmental power. This shift led to a new kind of state-sanctioned religion, and religious loyalty became a requirement for public office and social standing. It also triggered persecution of sects outside of the Church of England, and that persecution drove many to fearlessly seek refuge in the New World.
By stating that the federal government shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, the Constitution made a bold break from the old world. The United States would not have a state church. There would be no religious tests or qualifications to serve in government. Under the Constitution, a Quaker had the same rights as a Presbyterian, as a Catholic, or as someone of the Jewish faith. Even those with no belief at all could still participate fully in American life. The Free Exercise Clause took it even further. It promised that Congress would make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That meant every citizen was free to worship, or not, in whatever way they chose, without fear of persecution or government interference. This was monumental and one of the most significant protections of personal freedom in world history.
It's likely that the men who debated, compromised, and drafted the Constitution had no idea how far-reaching these words would become. At the end of the 18th century, the inhabitants of the original colonies were still relatively homogeneous. Most European colonists claimed a Christian faith of some sort. Anglicans were the majority, but there were also Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Quakers, Baptists, Methodists, Catholics, and Jews, along with deists who believed in a higher power but followed no organized religion. The religious diversity we see in America today would have been unimaginable to them, as would the large number of Americans who now claim no religious belief in particular. And yet, the First Amendment protects them all. It guarantees the right to worship freely, regardless of faith or tradition.
But here's what the First Amendment doesn't actually say. It never mentions a wall of separation between church and state. The phrase comes from a letter written by President Thomas Jefferson in 1802 to the Baptist Association of Danbury, Connecticut. Jefferson used the phrase to reassure them that the federal government wouldn't interfere with their religious practices. Whether intentionally or not, his words introduced a new interpretation, one that went beyond simply avoiding a national church and toward a total separation of religion from public life. Some argue this broader interpretation goes against the original intent of the framers, noting that Jefferson wasn't at the Constitutional Convention. In fact, he wasn't even in the country. He was serving as an emissary to France. Even Jefferson was surprisingly friendly to public expressions of religion, however, both as governor of Virginia and president of the United States of America.
Even so, the wall of separation analogy has been cited repeatedly by the Supreme Court and has become one of the most common, though unofficial, views of the First Amendment. It's a classic example of something not in the law being construed as the law.
Even with the complicated interpretation of the text, the First Amendment has endured. It stands as a bulwark protecting the religious rights of Americans, and it remains as a beacon of hope for people around the world.